Welcome to the tip sheet edition for HomeBuilder. Today, I'm going to cover the topic of universal versus model house area costing and why we would choose one over the other. As you can see on the screen, I've got the administrator or executive edition of HomeBuilder, and I can see lots of cues all over the place telling me all the pieces of information I've got available. I'm firstly going to look at base contract items here, and then I'm going to look at color chart items. I'm not going to get into components and bundles or after sales service. Those are more complex topics which need to be handled individually. Let's get into the first part with base contract items. Base contract items are items which are used in the building of the lot and are the same each time for that model. We're not having customers make choices or differences. We always have to produce a working drawing. We have to do permits. We need to do some landscape design, some driveway base asphalt, whatever the topic may be, which is required every single time for the model that we're building. These are the costs which happen here. Over on the right-hand side of this screen, you will see that I've got something called a cost scope. And what I'm saying here is that for working drawings, permits, city model applications, site grading plan, these are always the same cost every single time, irrespective of the model that I'm building. Therefore, they have a universal cost scope, always the same price. When I get into things like surveys and excavation and outside water service installations, I know that I'm going to have a different price per model. When it comes to base contract items, most commonly we only have one house area, and that is the all house area. I can see that through this button up the top here, and you can see that I just have one house area defined when I'm building a base contract. We only get into more detailed house areas when we get into color chart selections. So from a base contract perspective, the decision is normally relatively simple. If I'm going to have a different cost at the model level for something that I'm doing, then I need to make my cost scope per model house area. Even though I only have one house area, that just means it's going to have one cost per model. If the cost is the same every single time I do this, I have to action this item, then the cost is universal. Remember that you will establish a different set of costs each new phase. So I may have a price per model for outside drain installation for phase one, and I might have a different cost for outside drain installation for phase two. And I might, for instance, for the design layout, have one price for every single model on phase one, but I have a different price for phase two. That's absolutely fine. We establish different costs for each new phase. Remember that you can copy costs from one phase to the next if you wish, but it's not mandatory. So that's construction items from the base contract level. This discussion about cost scope becomes more complex when you get into color chart items. And it gets more complex because we typically have more house areas. So if I look at this flooring engineered hardwood, I am allowed to install this in all of these house areas here: family rooms, breakfast rooms, bedrooms, and the rest. So now I'm not only defining the cost at the level of the house area, at the model, but I'm also defining it at the level of the house area. So you rapidly get a significant number of costs that you have to put in. You will notice that this item has a universal cost scope. And the reason why it does is that we're pricing this, and I'm going to open up the card to look at the detail of this. We're pricing this at the measurement type code of area. So we have takeoff values for each model for every single one of these house areas. If we know our takeoff values, square foot, square meters, linear feet, whatever it may be, if we know our takeoff values and we're prepared to enter them at the house area level, then we will be able to use a calculation of that takeoff value, multiply it out at the cost, and have a fairly simple time. Therefore, we use a cost scope of universal. I could, for instance, say every time I select this upgrade level 1 for engineered hardwood, I'm going to charge an additional $4 per square foot. And if I go to upgrade level 2, I might charge $5 a square foot. So simple costing because I have universal cost scope, but it requires, in this situation, entering of takeoff values against the model house areas. So sometimes a little extra work up front means that you have an easier cost maintenance after the fact. As a different sort of example, this upgrade level is established per model house area. So in here, I'm not saying necessarily that I'm going to price at the square foot level or square meters level. I'm going to produce a cost increase. This is a color chart selection that a customer may do at each model house area basis. So if I want to look at that at the contract level, let's see what that would mean for me from a work perspective. I'm going to open up the vendor contracts that I eventually will create. I'm going to go down into my hardwood selections for this contract. I've got a few contracts against this flooring company, but I'm just going to look at the last one. Now, if I go into the current prices that I've got established for this phase, you will see that this item, 44,140, has many, many, many lines. I have to, for the Jupiter model, that's this section here, I have to define the additional cost for each of these house areas. In my situation, I haven't bothered, but this is just a demonstration. I then have to do the same for the Mars A model. And excuse me, I have to do the same for the Mars A model, the same for the Mars B model, and so on. This means that I've got to establish a lot of costs in here. Now, we make it a little bit easier by giving you an export and an import into Excel so you can manipulate the data more easily. But I've got to do a lot of work here because I said that this item here, the 44,140 flooring hardwood, was to be priced at a model house area level. If I go further down, you can see how many of this item I've got. Just by having a handful of models and a series of items, I've got tons and tons of entries to maintain in my vendor contract because I'm not prepared to put takeoff values in. When I come down here, you will see that there is no house area defined in this vendor contract. It's because this item is defined as a universal costing. So on this item, I've decided that the 6110, which is going to be engineering hardwood upgrade level 1, I have multiple variants, and they cost $4 a square foot each time I choose ash, $5 a square foot each time I choose cherry, $6 a square foot each time I choose oak. But I only have to make one entry in here, this $6. So it's significantly simpler maintaining the vendor contract. However, I must enter the takeoff value against each model, against each house area that this might end up in. And if you go down to upgrade level 2, then you will see that I've got another series of variants which have maybe the same price, maybe a different price. But the point is that I don't have much vendor contract maintenance. If you think about how significant the number of records would be if you had in this item up here multiple variants, then you'd be entering hundreds and hundreds of costing entries to match up with your model house areas. So when it comes to things like engineered hardwood with multiple upgrade levels, with multiple variants, because we've got different colors or species or whatever, then often it's much better to use a universal costing rather than using a model house area costing. Now, if I go back to my color chart items, you will see in here, I've chosen universal costing because I have the measurement here, which requires that I enter a universal, that I enter a takeoff value against the model. And for others, I've decided to price per model house area. Things which are more sensible for pricing model house area could be cabinetry, could be countertops, and could be stairs. So this one probably won't have quite so many entries because I don't have quite so many offerings. Quite a bit to think about, and the best way to approach this problem is some of the stuff is obvious, like these engineered upgrades where I have tons of upgrades, tons of variants and lots of models and lots of house areas where they may go into. You'd really want to lean towards universal if you can. When you get to things like kitchen cabinetry, maybe, but more like a dishwasher, that would very clearly universal. I'm going to charge the same for this dishwasher, irrespective of the model that I'm going to put the thing into. Down here, I've got a fireplace, and I'm going to charge this per model because I do have a different price per model. I don't have too many offerings here. This is reasonable to enter at the model basis. So don't just think of it as I want to make it per model every single time. If you're going to have a significant amount of vendor contract levels, you might want to consider universally costing. And that applies to universal pricing, but that needs to be explained as a separate topic if you want to have markup values. I hope this was helpful to get you started on which cost scope to choose for your items. Thank you for watching.